I'm doing very well. I was happy with like the first half of your performance in that debate. It's refreshing to see you take rhetoric seriously.
Well, thanks. I tried. What happened in the second half?
Well, after you mentioned the tweet thing and you kind of snapped that trap, I feel like things went downhill.
Oh, because we spent a lot of time arguing about a tweet. I guess I shouldn't have just said anything at all. I feel like his attempt at describing the humor there was really stupid, though. I thought everything he had to say in that part was really dumb. But I didn't want to get like hung up on like trying to get him on old tweets or some shit. But
Yeah, I feel like everything got really confusing after that point. And sometimes you were kind of excited and you wanted to like get out an answer or call something out like quicker than you can like find the words to explain all of the logic. And like it got kind of confusing after that point and stuff got heated.
sure.
Do you really still not understand his argument though?
There are like two separate arguments that I can understand, but I don't. I think I understand. I think what he says he's saying. I don't truly believe that he believes it.
DGG's gonna hate this, but I actually really like his version of like leftism and stuff. I think that compared to other like lefterly people, I really appreciate like the pragmatism and the way that he talks about the stuff that he talks about.
His version is not pragmatic at all. I don't know what you mean by that. What is in his version? What's the difference between a capitalist and a leftist living in a capitalist world?
That's difficult.
No, it's not difficult. That's a really easy question. Just what do you think is the difference? That's a really easy question.
I can't answer it because I don't really understand like a significant difference based on your guys' conversation.
Okay, so I would consider that to be a huge problem.
Yeah, I would say the bigger problem is his indifference to misinformation, so long as it's like pushing the right ideology.
Well, we're not even talking on that level. I'm just saying that
Sure.
in his, because the way that he's got it set up is that basically the correct answer is that he would have to agree with, based on, if I assume I'm understanding at least what he pretends to believe, is that there is absolutely no difference in the real world between like a socialist and a capitalist living in a capitalist system.
But he would hope that they do better.
Oh my God, that's such a, why do you say that?
Because that's what he says.
But that doesn't mean anything.
Maybe. I think
Wait.
it gets back to... Oh,
What are these words?
maybe?
What are you saying right now? Stop doing that.
Okay. My bad.
Okay.
All right. I don't know how to be... How to... Okay, so
So if we're having a conversation on like what we ought to do in terms of like ethics or maybe expectations we would have of people, like should your son or daughter do their homework? Well, I would hope they would. That's not really an answer, right?
would you expect a student in that position to do their homework?
That would be the expectation, yes.
Oh, okay, then I guess it's neutral, right? And then if they go above and beyond, that's great. And if they don't do it, it's kind of sad.
Wait, no, hold
like
on. I'm not trying to do the capitalist socialist comparison. I'm illustrating how silly the word is when I ask you if something ought to be done. If you would say like, well, I would hope it would be. In one question, I'm asking you like about a moral principle, and what you're answering with is some like weird personal preference, which is not relevant to the question.
Yeah, that was a confusing part for me as well in his side of the debate, which was like, how come we can't just make ought statements? I feel like what we're avoiding is saying that people ought to do this. And instead we're saying, I would like if they did this, but I don't think that they ought to. It's going above and beyond.
Yeah, because it's an easy way to try to weasel out of having a moral principle by just retreating back to a personal preference. Because you can state a personal preference in a non-offensive way that seems like you're saying something good without being like courageous enough to step forth and give the moral principle. So another really good ancient example of this is when I was arguing with Hassan. I had an argument with Hassan about whether or not you ought to be able to call the police. Like, because Hassan was making a strange argument about how, like, well, if you call the police, there's a chance that the people that are like robbing a store might be illegal immigrants. So calling the police is immoral. And that was a big statement to me. It's like, well, wait, should you call the police if you are afraid that like somebody's going to hurt you? And his response to that, he said over and over again.
Because I'm putting 100%.
Wait, oh my God. His response to that over and over again was, well, I wouldn't do it, right? let's say that we have two people that are standing outside. They legitimately like make me nervous. I don't know if they're gonna rob my house or whatever. And I call the cops. Let's say that the cops show up. They arrest these two people for loitering or being threatening or whatever. And then they find out that they're illegal immigrants and they refer them to ICE and they get deported. Am I, as a homeowner, like the person that like reported them, am I now complicit in like deporting illegal immigrants? Is that on me? Do I have that liability?
Yes.
Okay. So should people just never ever call the cops ever then?
Yeah, I suggest against that. Yes.
Okay. I mean, we just have like a totally fundamental view of this, I guess. Then. Sure. So let's say that a woman is at a party. She starts walking home and she's being followed by some people. She's getting nervous. She doesn't know if she's going to be assaulted or what. Let's say that she calls the cops there. Cops arrest the two guys and they get reported to ICE because they're illegal immigrants. Did that woman, is she playing a part then in calling the cops and getting illegals deported? Should she not have done that?
This is hurting my brain, dude.
It's hurting your brain because
a random stranger walking and feeling threatened by random people is entirely fucking different than, like I said, a school participating in this thing that they know they shouldn't be participating in.
I'm only asking this because you said
they fucking possibly can.
You said to never call the cops. So I'm asking you if you really feel that way. You said you should never call the cops. So it sounds like you don't actually feel that way.
Wowie.
Okay. You, in the comfort of your own home, calling police officers because you saw some random people that scared you is a little different than a woman walking home at night or a man walking home at night alone and feeling threatened by the presence of other people. They would still be somewhat complicit, but it's not the same.
Okay.
In that, under that circumstance.
So that's
call the cops.
So there are two things. Sure.
And
so there
I
are
would
two.
urge someone else to not do that as well, but it's more understandable, and it doesn't really matter because under none of these circumstances do you have an obligation to the person that you're fucking calling the cops on.
Okay.
I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
You're giving me like one of the most privileged arguments I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, you're literally telling me that, like, well, if you're a woman and you're walking down the street and you might be scared because people are following you, it's pretty rude of you to call the cops. That's a pretty mean thing to do, dude. Don't do that. What if you've got a person who lives in a neighborhood where there have been a lot of break-ins? What if it's somebody who's had their house broken into before and are worried that somebody's going to do it? Like, it's easy for you to say, like, oh, well, you should never, ever call the cops ever. I don't know if you've been in these situations or if you know people that have been in these situations. But that's a pretty shitty thing to say to people that, like, maybe are actually fearing for stuff like that. Like, I feel like it's really crazy to be like, oh, you should just never, ever call the cops ever.
Why the fuck would you say it's a privileged argument?
Because you're making it because it's a really privileged argument.
Yeah.
Which is, you're avoiding answering like the moral principle there. You're avoiding the moral part of the argument, and you're trying to give like something that's like not offensive and sounds good without like committing yourself to a moral position. So like when I ask, like, you know, if you're a leftist and you own property, should you charge less than market rates? I'm asking for the moral principle, not like, well, I'd prefer if they didn't. Well, that doesn't really tell me anything. I don't really care what you prefer. That's not it's not a quick conversation of like, oh, like what would your ideal society look like? Or what do you prefer people to do? It's more like what moral principles ought people live by is the question.
Yeah, and it would seem from the outside that it should be much easier to jump from that, oh, you would personally prefer that they do this, so can't you just make an ought statement? It feels like that should be an easy jump for him, but it seemed to be... No, because like preferences and moral like oughts are two different things. Or as he kept saying, the supererogatory or whatever versus... like these are things that are morally neutral. It'd be nice if people would do them. He must have just learned this word and this term just so that he could have this position. I'm convinced of that. But yeah, like just because we prefer something should be done doesn't mean that it is necessarily like a moral principle that we ought to do a particular thing. Like he's deliberately, the avoiding of the ought is not something that's happening on accident here. It's a deliberate choice to avoid committing himself to a position that sounds bad, in my opinion. Yeah, of course, I'm Mr. Charitability, so unfortunately I have to like err on the side of caution. Sure, we can, but I mean, like when you dance around on a subject, I mean, I'm pretty as charitable as I'm ever going to be to anybody. Vaush is going to be up there, but I mean, like when we walk through like kind of the same loop like a million times, and we're still giving answers like, well, I would prefer this, then it makes me feel like you're afraid you're too afraid to answer the question.
For me personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with an individual maximizing their outcomes within an unethical system like capitalism, especially if they're a socialist, because it increases the likelihood that they'll be able to achieve political and economic power.
My issue right now is that, so what I'm doing right now is I have a little Vaush machine. I've got a little compiler in my head of Vaush code, okay? And you're giving me lines and lines and lines of code. And what happens is I push compile every time you say something, and now I'm running into errors because you've got two conflicting statements. What
conflicting statement?
Sure. So the earlier statement you gave me in this conversation is that you ought to maximize your existence in a capitalist system, and to do so is not inherently wrong.
I never said ought to maximize. That was your language. I think it's okay if people do that.
Man, if you're bored, if you want an example of just an unbelievably good discussion, last night with Pisco, and Apollos for a little bit, and Bastiat, those are like three people. These guys will just fucking jump headfirst into engaging with hypotheticals, modifying hypotheticals so that we're dealing with the underlying positions, giving honest answers and accepting like the extreme ends of their ideologies. Like all of that conversation was just an amazing, for like 4 hours. It was unbelievable. Like Pisco was saying that like, oh sure, in a world where there's less than 1% of people could be enslaved to make other people happy, I don't think it would happen, but I guess I would be obligated to this position. Like everybody was like owning like hypotheticals in every like sense of the way it was. And then I think on my end, it was like, if somebody steals a blade of grass, you should be able to infinitely murder people. Like it was an amazing discussion. Everybody in that discussion was like the most good faith, like making big efforts to understand everybody. Like if we do grant the excessive consequentialist viewing, I think that we can probably get to an area where we start saying things like the existence of the matrix is justifiable if it prevents humans from hurting each other. That some infinite utility monster that robs us of all of our freedom and all of our liberty ultimately is the best and most moral choice for us.
I think Pisco actually said he would be completely okay with that system. And, you know.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, gotcha. Wait, and that's great that you're okay with that. But if I present like that opposite extreme hypothetical, then other people are like, well, okay, well, hold on. Because right now it sounds like all of the extreme hypotheticals have been on against Bastiat in my position. So clearly we're fucking insane, right? But I think you could.
I think the flavor example.
What? No, yeah, I didn't harp on it a lot, right? Because I'm not trying to like score points or whatever. But but the other end of that hypothetical could also be relatively extreme as well. But I just wanted to give that so that because it feels like.
Well, here's something to make it so that there's not going to be a parade of horribles.
Holy shit! If you're ever bored and want to hear what I would consider to be like a good discussion, just like parts of that were incredibly good faith. All of my conversations with Pisco are very, very, very good. I consider that guy is like one of the best interlocutors I've ever had like the engagement with before. Jesus, but yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I'll definitely take a look at that then. Going back to the super.
Yeah, sorry.
Like, what? Do you understand that? Could you explain that to me?
It's so.
Oh, you don't understand it?
No, I understand. It's just such a stupid. I never hear this brought up ever. I don't think anybody talks about this that much, or maybe they do. But like, so an obligation is something that we would say you ought to do. And typically, I think generally not doing this would be considered immoral, right? So for instance, like you ought to treat other people with kindness and respect or whatever, right? Or you ought to you ought to do what is morally good, but that's it's a circular. A supererogative, fuck, I don't know how to pronounce this word, is like saying that like it would be like good if you did this thing, but you're not necessarily obligated to do it.
Oh, well, that sounds like his argument.
I know, but it seems like a really dumb way to, I don't know, for this particular conversation, in my opinion.
I'm sure it's frustrating because it gets out of answering difficult questions or taking a more solid position, but it does sound like it's what he's talking about. But as someone that doesn't understand a ton of philosophy, I don't really understand how that plays into other larger concepts. And it seems like other philosophy people are giving him like pushback about those statements. So.
Probably, yeah. I don't think we needed to dive into much philosophy at all here. That's why I kept trying to avoid like getting into like big like consequentialism or any of these types of things. I don't think it was necessary for this conversation. But yeah, I feel to me like it's basically something that's used entirely just to avoid like giving a difficult answer to anything, which was like very, very, very frustrating to me.
Did I understand him correctly that he's okay with misinformation so long as it's pushing the right ideology?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes, it is. That's also why he was making the weird statement that like consistency isn't good because wouldn't we want bad people to be inconsistent? Which is an incredibly bizarre argument, but we didn't even get the chance to explore how unbelievably bizarre that statement is. But
you think it's good if people are consistent, even if that consistency has them following up and doing things which are unethical?
I mean, I think it's good to be consistent, but I don't think it's good to do unethical things. I don't know how I'm supposed to answer this. If you don't have consistency in an argument, then the logic part completely falls apart. Now, in terms of living in real life, nobody is perfectly consistent. People make mistakes. That's fine. That's why they're called ideals, okay? Nobody lives up to them, all right? I'm not saying that people in real life need to be perfect or they can never be bad or wrong, otherwise they're horrible, hypocritical people. I'm just saying, well, let's talk about the ideal. Like, what should we be striving for? We don't strive to be imperfect. We strive to be perfect. It's strange because I'll say, like, we should never, like, my ideal might be, we should never insult somebody. And then somebody goes, okay, well, you insult people, so you're a hypocrite. No. What would make me hypocritical is if I defend insulting people while simultaneously saying I shouldn't. I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know if there's like a ladder or a chart that I could draw, but I see where a lot of people get lost in these arguments because there's like, it feels like I'm being weaselly, but there are contexts that you have to understand to make these arguments in order to make sense of these arguments. Like if somebody said, I don't know if this makes sense to you guys or if you guys are like lost on this. If somebody says insulting people is bad, we shouldn't do it, but then they insult somebody, that doesn't necessarily make them a hypocrite. It just makes them imperfect, just if they acknowledge it's a mistake or they fucked up. But if somebody says insulting people is bad, and then they defend insulting people, well, now they're being hypocritical. Now they have a contradiction in their moral system. Just because, or in the beliefs that they're espousing, right? Just because you make a mistake doesn't mean that you have a contradiction or you're a hypocrite, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it could in severe cases, right? But like generally, the problem is if you start to make exceptions where it's not logically permissible to do so. Does that make sense? So what I took away from this as well, if one's highest principle is an individual being consistent to one's principles, then we run into weird areas morally. You don't, dude. If we wanted to have a conversation, if we imagined that fucking philosophy is like a fucking train track that like we go on a journey to like, and we take different stops and we have like different routes that we can take in life or whatever for like the decisions that we can make, right? If we even want to fucking get out of the station, we need to assume that we're going to be consistent with our beliefs, right? If you can't even say from the beginning, like, okay, well, if I make a statement that I say is true, then that statement is true. If we can't get there, you can't even get the fucking train out of the station. You're fucked. Like, of course, being consistent is without consistency, you fall into absurdity. Like necessarily, of course, you have to be consistent. True statements have to be true. False statements have to be false. If you can't assert what is true or false, you can't even have any meaningful conversation. This is like epistemically true.
Another difficult thing was seeing that he kind of struggled to meet you halfway on the effects of misinformation. Like it didn't seem like he was giving much like charitability in terms of like larger effects of like large media outlets like reporting misinformation.
Yeah, which was kind of annoying because like I feel like my conversations with him, and like I said, I would contrast this so much to my conversation with Pisco and Bastia. My conversations with him, he says that he feels like I'm trying to trap him. I can agree with why he would feel that way, but it's because I really, and I know people get mad when he says that, it doesn't feel like he engages anything I say with like a high degree of trying to understand and meet my arguments. It feels like he's always looking for like a weasel, or he's always looking for an out. Like if somebody were to give you an analogy for something, like let's say somebody emailed me. Oh fuck, I wish I could find this email for an example of like how to deal with. Somebody emailed me and they asked me a question where they were like, hey, here's a philosophical question for you. Let's say that we discovered a vaccine, and let's say that this vaccine had a 100% prevention rate for COVID-19, but it only worked for white people. Would it be ethical to publish this vaccine or something, right? Like, the way that I engage with that question, if somebody proposes that question to me, is like when I respond, I'll set up a hypothetical for them. So like, we're assuming obviously that no other vaccine can be found in a reasonable amount of time. We're assuming that this is going to make a significant difference in mortality between black and white people. We're assuming, like, right, I'll get those out of the way right away because I can tell what the meat of this guy's question is, right? He's asking me like, let's say that we found something that's good for health, but only for like a certain subset of people. Is it good to push it, right? But I feel like if I were to ask that question to Vaush, if I were to say like, hey, let's say that we found a vaccine and it only works for white people, do you think that'd be moral to push? I feel like Vaush would be like, well, yeah, but if we had that vaccine, we'd probably find one for black people in the next 2 months. So I think it would be okay. Like that's how he would answer the question. And it's like, you're totally missing like the meat of what I'm trying to ask. And then if I were to try to construct an analogy, rather than actually listening to the analogy and trying to figure out like exactly and trying to figure out like how it's like trying to address the meat of a moral question I'm asking. Instead, he will try to nitpick the fuck out of the analogy to make it not fit, into the point to where he's making absolutely bizarre claims like slavery wasn't an institution of the South, and then like, because you must, or maybe you don't agree, I don't know, maybe you thought his analogy was good there, or his attack of my analogy was good there. I thought that was just unbelievable. That whole part of the conversation was just like blowing my mind.
What's difficult is part of it I agreed with, and part of it my chat also agreed with, which is that you can't compare the institution of slavery in the South to the institution of like land ownership.
Wait, I'm not comparing the entirety of the institution.
Hold on.
Okay.
So like, I know that, right? And I understand the purpose of the hypothetical.
Of course.
And I can see like,
and any normal human being with a functioning brain is going to understand that hypothetical.
Yeah. But a human with a functioning brain may also understand this comparison he's making between these two institutions and the role that they play in the society, in that they're like at different levels. And if they choose to focus on that and not on the reasoning behind your hypothetical, and they don't see you giving like credence to that claim of his, then they feel like you're not listening to him. And
but
that
it's
started to become like a theme of the later part of this debate.
I totally disagree. I think that hypothetical is exceedingly clear that any normal human would hear it and be like, oh, I understand exactly what's being compared. But instead, this like relentless nitpicking of like, well, there's a limited number of houses, and there's an unlimited number or not a limited number of slaves that need to be filled, or somebody might not buy the, like, you're nitpicking it so hard because you're scared of the answer that you're forced to give based on your prior moral statements. That's what it felt like to me the entire time. I don't think I came out and said that, but that's absolutely the feeling I was getting. Because given everything that he said, he should have just bitten the bullet on it and been like, yeah, I don't think that being a slave owner would have been like a morally wrong thing to do, because, you know, if you're not going to own a slave, someone else is going to own a slave, and I only expect you to live up to the what society is expected of you to do at that particular time. And then he would have started to find some consistency. But every time I tried to push him on an uncomfortable answer, he would immediately drop. And I know that, and I didn't watch your stream, but I'm sure you probably got mad at me using the rape analogy. I think my rape analogy there was perfect, because I think that the moral precept he was giving was absurd, was actually unbelievable. The idea that it's moral to do something as long as somebody else would have done it anyway, that is an absolutely absurd moral statement. I don't believe any human being actually believes that statement. And that's why I think the rape analogy was like, so you're telling me that like if someone else is going to rape somebody, it's okay if you do it? Like, because his statement is just, and it blows that statement completely open. Like, of course it's not moral to do something just because somebody else would have done it anyway. Sorry, I'm rambling a lot. Go ahead. I don't know how you turned into such an absurd consequentialist that you became a fucking ANCAP that thinks that like opening businesses and exploiting fucking... That's what you're saying. 100%. You're like, yeah, fuck it. If I don't do this business, someone else is going to do it. I have way higher ethical standards than that. You're the one that's coming, and then you're literally using the like, what about the global poor? You're literally using the what about the global poor argument. Do you understand that? When you say like, if I don't open a business, well, someone else, like if I open a business, I'm giving those people somewhere to work. That's what people use as excuses for sweatshops, for slave shops. Like this is all three levels of like moral action. So you could either act morally wrong, or you could disengage from the system completely, or you could act morally right. I think that I can encourage people to act morally righteous. I don't think it's fair to say, well, if he doesn't open a business and act in a bad way, someone else would just open the business. No, he could open the business and act in a good way. If these are truly what his ethics are, you could do that.
Yes, that would be good.
Yes. But the neutral or the disengagement thing, if you have principles, I don't think that's good. I think that's bad. If you walk by a car if you walk by the car,
assumption that the neutral option for a lefty opening a business would be to not open that business, which I obviously disagree with. I'm sorry, if there's some irreconcilable difference that we're not going to resolve here, then we might as well not waste an additional hour on it. If you acknowledge that when a lefty opens a business and let's say pays market rate same as everyone else and the workers are treated fine, really middle of the road, as hard as that is to abstract, all you are doing in a purely empirical sense is giving local workers an additional choice, an additional place that they could sell their labor.
Well, participation in a morally righteous way, and the swimming one could result in saving somebody's life. Participation in a righteous way in the economic sense could be you opening a business that improves the material conditions of multiple other workers and families. I think those are comparable.
I think that'd be great.
Okay. Abstinence, in one sense, is you just stand by and you watch a person drown. And abstinence, which is negative. And abstinence in the business sense is you just stand by and you watch another business open up and exploit workers.
Which would be neutral, but the death is negative.
How is that? Okay. I never, ever, ever want you to say again that like capitalism is negative or business owners are bad, because
I don't
you
think
have
you
bit.
understand my argument enough to
I guess
criticize
not,
it,
because
Destiny.
you've bit the neutral bullet on basically every single actor in a capitalist system.
No, so I'll go through each part of that. So
Yeah, sorry.
firstly, yeah, I agree that the hypothetical was clear. To me, it was clear. I think to my audience, it was clear. So I think you're in the clear there. I would also agree that like, yeah, he was nitpicking it. But remember that one thing that you talked about doing was kind of giving pushback when you feel like the framing of a hypothetical or an analogy kind of like begs the question.
Mhm.
I feel like this is also what he is doing here. And I can say that like rhetorically, of course, this is of benefit to him. If he can put out a single point that people can grab onto, aside from the point you're trying to get at with the hypothetical, and like muddy the waters about like why you're using that or the validity of it, then people can focus on that rather than the mechanics of the hypothetical.
Yeah, but like, so I'm trying to be more careful with my rhetoric, but I'm not trying to do that at the expense of making like reasonable, rational arguments. Like, I'm just trying to be careful and mindful of the rhetoric so that I make sure that both of us are on an even playing field. It feels to me like his goal with rhetoric is to have the upper hand rhetorically, whether the arguments he's making are good or bad. So if somebody was setting this up for me, like I might say something like, okay, yeah, I agree with that, but we're going to both agree that this is incredibly unlikely and that this is pretty loaded in terms of what you're asking, right? Whereas for him, he'll use rhetoric to try to make my position sound absolutely absurd, absolutely untenable, and then refuse to even engage with the question. So like I feel like the way that we're engaging rhetorically there is a little bit different, or at least I would say so.
Yeah,
of course.
well, you make him look absurd and stuff too when you give like the rape in a cage analogy or the slavery one.
He
right?
makes
You're gonna
himself look absurd there, though. That's not my fault. I'm just asking him to be consistent on his moral prescriptions.
Like I'm not like shitting on you for it. I'm just saying that they're similar rhetorically, and I agree.
No,
Yeah,
no. I totally disagree. What I'm saying is that I'm trying to be aware of rhetoric to keep us on an even rhetorical playing field. So that if I am forced to like logically answer something through deduction, at the very least, if I know if it sounds bad, I'm either going to rephrase it a little bit or I'm going to make people aware that this is an extreme hypothetical. That's how I'm trying to apply rhetoric to these conversations. His way of applying rhetoric is to say that this is ridiculous and I'm not going to engage. I think that these are two fundamentally different ways to apply rhetoric to a conversation. I'm not trying to use rhetoric to win. I'm just trying to keep it on an even keel. He's trying to use rhetoric to be able to avoid committing himself to answers that he doesn't want to give because deductively he thinks that they're bad. I think that that's a little bit different.
I get what you're saying there, that like the spirit of these two things and the way that you're using them on the whole might be different, but I would still stand by like some of the instances of rhetoric that you're using are very clearly to like make Vaush look bad more than they are to like even your guys' standing in argumentative terms.
I think that's your problem, not you, but his. If you have more precepts, like let's say that I say something like this. Let's say that I say you should be able to fuck anybody you want at any point in time as long as they're above 18 years old. And then somebody asks me, wait, should you be allowed to rape someone? I'm not allowed to go, oh, come on, dude. You're just using that analogy to make me look bad. Like, congratulations, you set up a hypothetical. Like, well, no, my moral precepts would obligate me to answer that question in a way that obviously makes me look bad, but they're not trying to trick or trap me. It's just a hypothetical to test the moral statements that I've given so far. I don't agree that is, I mean, like, in a way, is it trying to make somebody look bad? I mean, I guess you could argue it that way, but I'm just trying to figure out what his moral positions are. You have to understand that, like, his moral statements here are absurd. So any hypothetical I give is of course going to make him look horrible. When you're saying something like it's moral to do something as long as someone else would have done it anyway, that's an absurd moral statement. I could give a million hypotheticals that are going to make you look fucking horrible, I think.
Yep. Yeah. I'm just saying that like it's not like you're always using rhetoric to even the playing field. You definitely do rhetorically charged analogies and hypotheticals to highlight or underscore the problems in the logic there and the kinds of like outcomes that this way of thinking is going to produce. Like I think these two things can happen at once. I feel like, you know, that's okay. But to zoom out on the whole, are you using rhetoric in a different way? Are you using rhetoric to kind of flesh out the arguments and get a better understanding for like what positions he has and how far those go and where they start and stop? For sure.
Sure. I guess the
rhetoric a lot to like get out of situations. Yes.
Yeah, I think the way that I would summarize it is like I use rhetoric defensively, okay, and he uses rhetoric offensively.
Okay. I mean, it's definitely offensive when you're
If
trying to say if there's somebody in a cage and they get raped every day and that's just a normal thing and it's going to happen. Like,
that's his, but that's his moral thing. That's like
It sure is, but
I
at the
just
same
like
time, it is rhetorically-
I totally reject, like, if you're going to make a moral statement that is as extreme as that you ought to be allowed to do something and it ought not be considered immoral so long as someone else would have done it anyway, you've got to be ready for the next question, because that is like that's just an insane. We're probably, I understand we agree to disagree on this, but
like I don't think it's an agreed to I feel like you're saying like other stuff. I feel like all I'm saying is that obviously this is rhetorically charged to make Vaush look bad. I don't think it's rhetoric.
I don't think it's rhetorical. I think it's just logical. Like,
the rhetorical part is the fact that you chose a rape analogy of all things, or a slave analogy. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Of all the analogies you could choose, I don't think we can divorce the rhetoric. It's very clearly charged to make it look bad. That's fine, because it's also grounded in the logic. It's also asking him a question or a hypothetical that kind of highlights a flaw in his system and his like unwillingness to confront that, and him like squirming under that. Like, yeah, I agree.
I had another one that I used, which was like the wallet one too, I guess, but I don't know. Like, the reason why like things like rape or murder are good is because like those things are just, the reason why I think these are good go-tos for ethical conversations, because it's just universally bad, or at least as far as I know, nobody is going to defend, like, rape is like the worst thing you can do to someone short of killing them, and killing someone unprovoked, murdering someone is always just really, really, really bad. So in terms of like testing an ethical system, like, what?
Like, it would depend on the world, right? Because in a world where everybody's locked in cages and that happens all the time, it's neutral.
Well, yes, exactly. And if Vaush was willing to admit that, then I'm fine and we can move on to the next part of the discussion. So I agree with what you just said. What you just said is the logical conclusion of Vaush's moral system. If there's a world where everybody's locked in cages getting raped, you might as well go in and fucking rape away, because it's part of that world, I guess. But I think other people would say, well, hold on. Like, especially if we claim to be like progressive, or if we claim to be above like or ahead of the morals of the time, I don't think that we should say something is good just because everyone else is doing it. That's probably not, like, if 10 people walk up and kick a homeless dude on the street, like, you walking up and doing it afterwards just because someone else is going to, like, it doesn't necessarily make it a good action. I understand what you're saying.
To be clear to the chat and you, I obviously don't agree with this position, and I'm not defending this position. I'm just like, that seems to obviously be a logical conclusion of Vaush's thing. It's not what I believe. It's a bit of a meme.
Okay.
Like, one thing that I'm worried about is that, like, you guys aren't might have another falling out. Like, I feel like in 2021, you two could work together on a lot of political stuff. Is that something you guys have in the works, or that you want to do?
I mean, I enjoy like reviewing his stuff, or chatting with him is fun, because he's a fun person to chat with, even if we disagree. Like, so like, I mean, like, that's fun. But I mean, like, I don't like, in terms of this conversation, I felt like, given how like defensive he was over things, and given the statements that he was making, I don't know if we're ever going to be in an area where I could have a conversation like this and be more gentle than how I was. Because if I was in a debate with like a Nazi or something, and they would give me the moral precept of like, well, if someone else is going to do it, I might as well do it anyway. Oh man, dude, I'm going to be wheeling out some crazy arguments like immediately. I'm going to roast the fucking. So like, I feel like this conversation with Vaush was about as nice as I could have been, and he was still saying like, are you trying to do gotchas? Is this a debate trick? Are you trapping me? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm okay with you being like abrasive and stuff. I'm more so asking like, are you guys going to be doing anything political with each other? Like, one thing that he mentioned was pressuring other leftist creators to become engaged, whether that's by doing charity or by doing some organizing. I thought that was a cool idea. And I think that he can push creators in a way that you can't, because unfortunately your brand and your image and your history kind of precludes you from, convincing certain people to do anything.
I mean, I think Vaush is one of the few people that's starting to get to levels of being hated about as much as me on the internet. So we're probably pretty similar there in terms of like antagonistic or antagonized by like other types of communities. I mean, maybe we'll work on something in the future. His community absolutely fucking hates me though. So like, it's kind of annoying that like anytime I have any level of engagement with someone, their community is like full of like the worst like Nazi arguments that I've heard about me over and over again. It's like, I don't know, but maybe in the future we will, who knows?
Yeah, his Discord thinks you're like an alt-righter secretly and stuff.
Yeah,
It's
every
wild.
single person you don't like is a Nazi or an alt-righter. It's like standard lefty, like brain lit thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think he believes that, but there are some people in his community that are less than savory, though.
Yeah,
The same
but
can be said of yours.
the problem that I have is that like I think that I've uniquely built like a really good community given the size I have as a broadcaster. I don't think anybody else cares to put even remotely the same amount of effort into it. Like it's pretty rare, I think, especially for people that I'm on good terms with. It's incredibly rare that like I will have engagement with somebody and then my community will just like universally just fucking shit on this person over and over and over again. Whereas like Vaush's community, like obviously it's like trying to get me canceled, right? Like hardcore. Actually has successfully gotten me canceled harder than I think almost any other community ever has. So like, yeah, nobody really seems too interested in like defending me in their community or doing anything like actionable to actually change that. So yeah, it's just, it is what it is. Kind of used to it at this point.
I try to stick up for you, buddy.
Well, thanks, man. If you turn into a 4-figure, 5-figure streamer, we'll see if you feel the same way. Okay.
True. Another thing that came up when you were bringing up the tweets was you like barely touched upon this line of thinking, but you were like, what do you think all the people retweeting this tweet thought? Like, what did you think they thought the joke was?
Well, because
like,
he immediately tried to pivot to my Rittenhouse thing. And then he started to make an argument that I don't think either of us believed in.
Oh, your response to his Rittenhouse rebuttal was so fucking good off of the cuff that like, well, I didn't put out that clip.
Yeah.
Your people that you know put out that clip. I didn't create a clip. I created a whole stream where I laid out a much more like nuanced position. And he immediately had to be like, okay, yeah, I get that. Like, I also get clipped out of context. I get what you're saying there. Like, that little back and forth at the very beginning of the Twitter exchange was really, really good. I feel like you were really on your toes with it.
Sure.
But then, you know. Yeah. So you're not going to be working together with him much on anything political in 2021?
It's really hard to work with other political content creators because there's always like drama and shit, and I don't know if our goals align. If I don't, it's not like it's because I hate him or anything, but just like the fact that his like community absolutely hates me makes me wonder if I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, like behind the scenes, like, encouraging him to pressure these other content creators into doing things. Like one thing that he said that you may disagree with, but I personally found like good, was talking about how he wants to continue encouraging people to move in his ideological direction, and he wants them to like put out content, and he wants them to get engaged, and he doesn't want to discourage them by like shitting on what they're doing or how they're doing it. Instead, he wants to like just encourage any like positive movement in that direction. I feel like that's a big departure from the way other lefties talk. Now, granted, from your conversation, you see where that runs into problems, like with disinformation and stuff, kind of takes that he doubled down on that I thought were a bit crazy. But I think that's refreshing. I wish more lefties would take that position of just wanting to work with people and moving people towards ideas that they're passionate about and encouraging people when they're interested in it or moving in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of true, but like, I guess it's nice that you say that, but if none of the people that listen to you believe that, it seems like that message is similar to like in a video game or like this isn't financial advice or no copyright infringement intended. Like, that's a nice thing to believe in, but if like nobody that listens to you actually believes in that, like, is that really like a message you're preaching or spreading strongly? So for instance, like I don't think anybody can listen to any video of mine, let alone hours and hours, and come away thinking I'm a Nazi or an alt-righter. That's impossible. Like there's just no possible way that's the case. But if he claims to be so big on the like, oh, like we shouldn't purity test people, blah, 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 and his community all call me Nazis, it's like, okay, it's interesting, I guess.
One thing that I kind of found frustrating at the very beginning of the conversation, and I feel like created like a big disconnect between you and people that understood Vaush's position going into it, was when you're talking about, I just wish these leftists would do something. I wish they would do anything, because it feels like they're just accumulating wealth and they're not really like living by any of those principles or doing anything to further like their ideology. I feel like what's unfortunate and what's happening here is you're not counting content creation as a big enough something. And I think that Vaush counts that like pretty big.
I talk about that a little bit. I don't know if I talk about it with my discussion with him, but like the content creation part is good, but it's a little suspect if the only thing that you're doing to spread like the good message of the left is also coincidentally making you rich. Like,
Sure, but that's like separate from like recognizing that as something that's pushing an ideology you think is good and encouraging people to move in that direction through whatever means they choose to.
sure, I know, but like, say you get somebody that like teaches like a woman's help course or something, and then at the end of the night they go home and they like beat their wife or something. I don't know. Like, well, I did good stuff as part of my work, I guess. Like, well, can't you do a little more? I don't know. I mean, I guess if we're gonna say like making YouTube videos and Twitter that also like coincidentally like makes you rich is like that's the good you're doing. I mean, I guess, but I don't know.
Do you think it would have been possible to like not as like a logic thing or not as like a debate thing or a strong position, but to just talk at like a human level with them about like, I just really wish that these people would like do this thing. And like, I'm not saying like there is some moral ought here or that there is like a major significant difference between these people if you choose not to measure them with their own yardstick. But like I feel like he's reasonable enough that you could have got more ground. I just feel like he was pushing back against this idea of like focusing on individuals rather than the system or measuring somebody by their own like moral yardstick.
Yeah, I understand
really
what you're saying. And maybe this is me being sociopathic or autistic or something. I don't know. But like, even in like my personal life, I never make statements like that. I don't really care. Like I never really, yeah, I'll think about it more. Sorry. That's something that is like very foreign to me. I never think that way. Like, I'll never think like, I wish this person would do that ever. Like, I have expectations for how people are going to act. And then there are times where I want to be able to say like, this person that did this was wrong. This was like this is an immoral thing to do. Or this is like a morally righteous thing to do. But I never think in terms of like, I wish this person would do that. That just seems like such a worthless thought that could occupy my mind. Why would I waste my time thinking those thoughts? And why would I waste my time talking to other people about those thoughts? Like, why would we have discussions about like, what are some things we wish people would do? It's like, I don't know, like, now I'm being very dismissive when I say that. I'm sorry. It makes it sound like very like that's a really charged way of saying that. Just for me personally, I'm not really interested in those types of things. I'm more interested in like, what standards can we hold people to in terms of like, this is morally righteous or this is immoral? And then like, what policies can we do to force people to act in certain ways? Because the conversations of like, wouldn't it be nice if people did that? Like, is just so meaningless to me, in my opinion.
I guess that's that super derogatory or whatever.
Yeah, like those types of obligation or non-obligations, I guess, I'm sorry, are just like, it would be nice if somebody does. Like, okay.
Yeah, because I think there's like a common sense sort of discomfort that most of the audience could agree with, where like the content creator is making their entire brand around this thing, yet they choose in their personal life to like not keep that in the forefront of their mind when they're making any decisions. But
wait, can you say that part again? What do you say that again?
Yeah, so I think that like at a common sense level, I think most audience members could empathize with the feeling of like, hey, isn't it weird that these people make their entire brand about this thing, but they choose not to consider that thing when they're making decisions in their day-to-day life? But at the same time, I kind of get where Vaush is coming from when he says something like, I think that a lot of these people, just honest to God, they don't consider it. And whether you think they're dumb or ignorant or whatever because of that, that's whatever. But I think a lot of people, for some reason or another, just it's unfathomable to them that they would do this thing. And that kind of that kind of struck a chord with me. Like, yeah, that's probably explaining at least some of these people. I don't think they're all like super malicious and just collecting money. I do think that a lot of them have like preconceived notions about what they're able to do. They probably reason that content creation and pushing their brand and whatever is the best thing that they can do. And they're just kind of stuck in that way of thinking, and they're not looking at what they could do beyond that. There's more creators like you do other stuff.
I understand that, but if that's the case, then I have so many other problems then with what people are doing. So the first problem, and then you can write these down and do these one at a time. The first problem I would have is that like, I have a hard time feeling like you're very committed to what you believe if it doesn't come out somehow in the way that you live. Like, that's just very, very, very strange to me. Like, there are things that I preach on stream, and I'm pretty sure that if you talk to anybody in my personal life, they would be like, yeah, like, this is something that he does. Like, yeah, of course. It doesn't surprise me that he says this on stream because he does this all the time, of course. Like, I would hope that's the case with most things that I talk about, or almost everything I talk about. because, and then this kind of leads into the second problem, because the second problem I have is that like it feels like all of these people are very, very, very quick to ascribe horrible intent to other people that are on the other side of the political aisle. So it might be the case that like a lefty, maybe a lefty doesn't do anything good for society or for his community or anything like that just because he's just not thinking about it. But when a conservative is against food stamps, it's because they hate black people. Well, it's like, holy shit, like it, and then it feels weird because you've built yourself like this whole moral gymnasium for you to run around to explain why you don't have to do anything. But when somebody else does something you don't like, now they're like literally Satan incarnate. And it's like, that's kind of weird. So those things kind of like don't go together well for me, I think, in my head.
Yeah, I definitely think there's hypocrisy afoot. And I think that as somebody who holds himself to his principles a lot and works really hard in his personal life to follow his principles and live by them, I'm sure it's frustrating for you to see that. But I think something else that you realize after like all the time that you've spent on this platform and talking with these people is that that's not how like other people operate a lot of the time. There are some people that are, willing to engage and think this way and hold themselves to account, and they personally care about that, and they're trying to keep like their beliefs in the forefront of their mind when they're making decisions. But I think a lot of other people, that's just not really the case.
Sure, I understand that, but that hypocrisy though, like I can understand that, but then that's going to be something that I will attack.
Yeah, and in my opinion, like rightfully so. I think it's worth like pointing out inconsistencies between like somebody's branding and messaging and what they're choosing to do in their personal life, whether that's to like, make the audience reconsider their support or to encourage that person to reevaluate their own decisions and maybe consider like, changing tact. But I think if you want the latter, then Vaush's approach to things is going to be more productive than yours. And that's kind of where those two things
But Vaush's
collide.
approach wouldn't have these people change their behavior at all. They're fine like not doing anything. There's no expectation whatsoever.
Sure. I guess what I'm saying is when you're this critical of people and you handle it the way you handle it, I think if we look at like the probability of that person changing their behavior, it's less with you than it is with like Vaush kind of babying them and encouraging what he thinks is good and just being positive about the things that he thinks are positive.
Sure, and I understand what you're saying there. So I don't know if I'm just too disconnected from reality, but like I don't view what I'm saying as being that critical at all. To me, this is like what I'm talking about. What?
I mean, sometimes when you say shit like subhuman or whatever, bro, it is pretty.
Wait, subhuman, that has nothing to do. I'm not saying you're subhuman if you don't like live up to your values in society. That had to do with the guy fighting for me on Twitter. But like,
Well, you do. I'm going to give way big pushback on that because you say, I think that people who like don't live by their principles and their morals are like dog trash human beings and blah, blah,
sure.
blah.
Okay.
Blah.
Yeah, maybe I would. Okay. Well, sure. Then I sure. If I said that, then I do say that. But like when I am referring to that, I'm not referring to like living the most best good life possible. What I was going to say is that like when I said when you said I'm being too critical, and I said, well, I don't think I'm being too critical. Like the stuff that I'm talking about isn't something that would make you a good person. This is like baseline. Like when I if I go to a restaurant or any place I go to, I tip 20% or more every single time but I don't do that and then like think that like I'm a really good person for doing this. It's more just like I have a fuckload of money and like this is like the minimum of what I can do. This is like the bare effort that I can do. I don't think I'm at a part yet where if I do this, I'm being a really good person. It's more like this is like the least I can do. So like if I were to meet somebody that was like a multi-millionaire and we go to a restaurant and they like don't tip or they leave like $2 on like a $200 tab, I would think that this is like a trash human being. I would, because they're not even living up to like the baseline of what I would expect a decent human being with like integrity or principle to do. So in the case of like, if you're preaching about like all the socialist messaging and blah, 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 all the time, blah, 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 and you haven't done like a single thing in your life related to that cause, then yeah, I would consider you like, you're a trash human being. You just have like no value as a person to me. Like you're not doing anything.
Sure.
That's that. So yeah.
But
So
worth
okay.
keeping in mind that when you say nothing at all, you're not including the content creation, which is like a big like.
Because I don't give you credit for that because you get paid for that. Like, I'm sorry. Maybe that sounds too harsh, but like.
I mean, they could get paid grifting for another.
But that's what it. Do you
but the
understand
fact that
though? That's what it feels like to me. It feels like they're grifting. That's like, you're saying like,
Yeah.
don't I get credit for spreading this good message? No, you're getting paid out the ass to spread this message, and then you don't live it. So if anything, that might even make me think even less of you. Like, and I've even said this to some extent, like in some ways, like I like talking to Nazis and shit, because at the very least, they're going to be real with you. Like, they're going to tell you exactly how they feel, and they have like their little all white groups, and they're doing their little protests and their marches. Like, okay, well, fuck, like this, these guys are committed to their principles, because they're losing money out of YouTube. They're losing money because they're getting banned on other platforms, and they're going out, they're actually putting in the work. Like, okay, like that's, at least I know where your beliefs are. Like on the flip side, like lefties have all the corporate safe messaging. They have all the power of capital behind them, and they do nothing. Like, what the fuck?
So, and this is like to kind of flesh out where you're coming from a bit more here. Money seems to be a key component here, because you mentioned that quite a bit in the debate too. If they weren't making money doing the content creation, would you then give them points for it or no?
I mean, I would view it differently, and I would also have different expectations as well. So like, for instance, like a long time ago when Hassan was like just starting to grow as a streamer, I think he had like 1,000 views or whatever. Like, I know there's like a podcast where Train was like going in, I'm like, why don't you redistribute as well? It's like, well, you don't have to redistribute. Well, then also I wouldn't expect like Hassan at 1,000 concurrent viewers to be out like putting in all sorts of crazy fucking work to be like, I don't think he has the means to do so. But now when you're making $250,000 every month, it's like, okay, I don't know if we can use the same comic now to defend our inaction. Like, well, now the expectations. Like, I very much believe that a person in society, the more you're entrusted with, or the more capable you are, the more able you are to contribute, and the more you ought to. Like, that doesn't just make you a better person. That is like the expectation for you to act as a human increases. So like the bare level of work you have to do to be a decent person is increasing, I think. Like there's a story of oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. There's a story in a temple where I think there are a whole bunch of men that are making fun of no. There's a guy that walks up to make a contribution during temple. He walks up and he makes a big show of his donation in front of this statue or idol or whatever. He makes a huge show of this donation. Everybody's like applauding him. They're like, oh my God, this man just donated 700 fucking pounds or bags of myrrh or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, it's so great. And then afterwards, like this little lady goes up and she donates like 2 little shitty pieces of coin or whatever. And I think Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, this is where it's more difficult to get into heaven as a wealthy person than it is to pass a camel through the head of a needle. But Jesus is like teaching there was that like this lady is giving like everything she has to her donation to Yahweh, to God. She's giving like everything in order to do it. And the rich man is donating, and that's cool, but like the guy's fucking rich. He's not going out of his way to do anything. Like that's like the bare level of expectation he's barely meeting. And then he's making like a huge showy, flashy thing out of doing it. And it's like costing him nothing to do it. Like this is kind of like the thought that I'm having in my head when I think of like, what's the expectation of you to act good in society and then to be a good person? Sorry. Yeah.
No, I love that. I love that example. Out of curiosity, is that a story that you came into during adulthood, or was that back when you were like in Catholic school and stuff?
Catholic school.
Because interestingly enough, something that was talked about in my Discord was that people were saying that as folks that have been through Catholic school, they felt like they resonated with you on some of these principled positions and stuff. And they felt like the way that you treat how people should live by their principles and this disconnect was something that they got really frustrated about during their time in school. And I know that for your lore, I think you've mentioned before that like that kind of discrepancy in religious schooling and beliefs and stuff was like pretty pivotal to your early life, right?
The discrepancy in religious people. But in my high school, I think the education there was really, really well done. And for the most part, anytime I see Jesuits or what they do in the real world, I think that is a killer awesome sect of the Catholic Church. It's like the teaching order of the Catholic Church. I think the general agreement among most people is that Jesuits are usually really based. They're usually like really awesome people that do really well to live their messaging and everything. So yeah.
That's cool. In terms of like further reading or watching about that, is there any like religious folks you would recommend, like on YouTube or podcasts or anything?
Not at all. Not that I can think of. Everything I picked up was through school. There weren't any like really preachers or people that I would listen to. But I imagine that like if you're listening to a lot of like traditional Black leaders, like a lot of those speeches are going to be loaded and dripping with Christian messaging. Like Martin Luther King is, a lot of what he says is going to talk about like stuff that's going to come from like Christian messaging, right?
Yeah. On a bit of a tangent there, do you think that it's effective to use like biblical stories and things like that, or to mix them into like your explanations, your reasoning behind things? Like, I feel like they're pretty good at like explaining moral things to like a common person,
I mean, I guess they
or like
must be.
providing
This
good
is,
analogies.
yeah, I mean, this is literally the purpose of like, that's why Jesus tells parables, is to illustrate like some moral principle, right? Rather than Jesus saying like, hark, today we are going to speak about the deductive truths of moral goodness. Usually it's like, here's a story, here's a person, and like, this is why it's good to do this thing, because we can see it in action, yeah.
Yeah, because Dr. K has me thinking more about that too. He has the benefit of not dealing with like the Christian baggage that the Americans kind of have, because they don't really know anything about his religious beliefs and stuff, so they can't like go into the stories he's telling with like a preconceived notion of how they should interpret it. And I feel like he benefits totally. He benefits a ton from like using those religious stories to kind of get his point across.
Yeah, for sure. Humans think in non-robotic ways, so it's good to be aware of that. Yeah.
Would you ever consider stocking up on analogies and stories like that to use in place of things like rape analogies or other things?
I mean, I could, but then like, I mean, I could, but like these are things that work again among an audience that is like kind of like eager to hear what I have to say. I don't know if it would help in a debate, because I feel like for Vaush, I feel like if I were to give that story, like, don't you think it'd be good to live our principles? Then he would just answer, it's like, wow, what that woman did was way above what was called of her, and that's awesome. And you know what? The rich guy, maybe he could have given more, but he doesn't have to. He's just, living his best life as a capitalist. And I'd be like, okay.
Yeah. And to be fair to him, I guess that's like consistent with the positions he put forward, right?
Yeah, I guess, but deeply unsatisfying to me, and I think how a lot of people view these kind of statements, but sure.
One thing about the money, the way that I kind of worded it on stream was in terms of excess. Like it doesn't seem to be so much that these people are not spending their money, because when you talk about like, well, I have different expectations for different people depending on the amount of money they're making. When you're making X, Y, Z, I expect more. I feel like what we're looking for there is like when you have excess, like it depends on what amount of excess, whether that's time or money or social capital or whatever. How much excess are you dedicating to the things that you believe in? And if you're not, then that's difficult. And I think that gives Vaush room to be like, well, actually, I know that PhilosophyTube does this in her spare time, and she does this, and then we could start to see, oh, okay, we have a more full picture of things. Maybe she doesn't spend all of her money on stuff, but maybe she puts time into organizations or things that we're not aware of, and I think that could give us a more holistic picture and kind of open the floor for a more nuanced discussion if we're talking in terms of like, what are you putting your access towards? And that feels like a socialisty way of talking about things, but I might be wrong there.
Yeah, maybe. I feel like I shouldn't have to explicitly say that. I think that's kind of the implication. If you're talking about like a really wealthy person and asking what are they doing to make society better, the implication is that they're dealing in their excess. But maybe it would be good to like explicitly state that, I guess. Or maybe that would be effective.
Maybe it's pedantic. Maybe it doesn't make a huge difference, because the implication is definitely there. That was just
but maybe it would help, because I don't know if you've checked a subreddit. Like, there's lefties have this like one. You know how when you're arguing with right-leaning people, and then you hear that like, despite.
No.
Oh, there's like when you're arguing with like race realists or conservatives or whatever. There's the big like, despite being only 13% of the population, 58% of violent crime is committed by African Americans. Like that thing comes out, yeah. And it's like, as soon as you hear that word despite, it's like, oh shit. I feel lefties have like that in that comic that like is redeeming of all possible negative things that hi, curious, you live in a society, yet you criticize it, whether they use to like handwave basically every single thing I say. And then they keep saying like, oh, well, Destiny's just saying that every single lefty needs to be poor and they need to give up all their wealth. It seems to be like the most common response I hear to me over and over and over and over and over again.
And before I say what I'm about to say, I do empathize with you on this point, and I agree it's frustrating. But one thing I think you should keep in mind rhetorically going into these conversations is Vaush and the audience that kind of is privy to his beliefs, they are coming in with this notion that you hate lefty people and that you have a very big bias and that that's going to have a severe impact on your ability to have these conversations. So when he's not putting forward those arguments and you bring up, well, lefties normally say this, or lefties say this, or your lefty friends say this, or other lefties do this, like that is giving people what they need to hear to feed into that narrative. And I think that might be something to be more careful about next time if he doesn't explicitly bring up those positions.
I mean, I can try that, but the reason why the conversation started was because he was literally attacking tweets that I'd made about lefties, right? That's why I was even talking about anything else anybody said. He said that my statements related to them were stupid. And that's the whole reason why we even started talking in the first place.
Sure, but when he gives you a different position that's not in line with those beliefs or that line of argumentation, you say you're surprised that he's not putting that forward when other people say that.
Well, that was my surprise, because I don't know. Well, so you can tell me if you felt this or not. Maybe my feel is off here. But like the frustrating part to me was that I only get to watch like a minute of a stream. It sounded like he said my tweets were incredibly fucking stupid. He's like, these are dumb. This is the dumbest thing I've ever. But then by the end of our conversation, or at least about my tweets, he was like, oh yeah, these tweets aren't too bad.
It's in their material interest not to show it. The idea that it's part of this like duplicitous scheme just isn't borne out. ContraPoints, Natalie hides her income on Patreon. Has Natalie ever tried to like disguise herself as like one of the pros? Natalie?
No, but I explicitly don't use. Wait, can somebody link my Twitter thread? I explicitly didn't even list Natalie as a her. I don't think ContraPoints has ever done that fake proletariat shit. There are more examples. I just can't think of them off the top of my head. But I'm like, my problem are when people pretend that they're poor to be one of you so that they can pretend that they're fighting alongside with you. That triggers the fuck out of me. So one example I had of this is Brianna being like, I'm an unemployed journalist talking about a presidential candidate. It saddens me that you took time to weigh in on this. Defending Pete's failures capture black votes while he enjoys support from the Dem establishment. Anyways, got to get back to my racist mentions. Like, I don't know. There was another one where she talked about like, was it either her or co-host talked about like student loans. And like, I think both of these people are like fucking Harvard grads or some shit. And it's like, come on, dude. Really? And then there's PhilosophyTube, where she posted something about like not paying rent, and she's like, "I'm not gonna pay rent. Fuck that shit. Like, I'm not gonna pay." It's like, dude, you probably make like 15 times more than your fucking landlord. Why? Why are you doing this? This is such a virtue signal.
A lot of social pressure in the online socialist community about hiding one's income because being poor is an aesthetic, but that's not the same as like it being an attempt to trick or deceive people, you know? These are not the same thing.
When your aesthetic is literally disguised like some fucking property of yourself, how is that not a trick by definition? My flatmates and I are writing to our landlord to tell him we won't be paying rent in April due to the pandemic. Here's a template you can use if you need to do the same, and a list of things to bear in mind. Good luck. You don't think that this person is like making it sound like they need to get like out of paying rent due to the pandemic? Ignoring the fact that they're literally doing this to somebody that is probably making far less money than they do?
I don't necessarily have an issue with people calling for a rent strike and using collective language and doing
Stop.
stuff.
That's not what we're talking about. Oh my
I do
God.
think that it's bad that they hide their income, though. I think that's the big definer here. I think that if you show your income, then I think that's totally
This
fine.
is not what I'm saying is she is making it sound like she literally like won't be paying rent due to the pandemic, ignoring the fact that the landlord makes less than them. I would say that this is a trick into making somebody think that they're on their side. This is what I'm referring to. I think that my first statement is fair.
Side?
What?
Wouldn't she be on their side? I mean, she's a lefty. What do you mean is she not?
As in, has the same struggles, has the same class problems, has the same like problem affording rent, when that's not the case.
There is definitely an implication here that they can't afford their rent that I do find a bit unsavory. This is why I really wish they would show their income. But the general, like, we should do X language, I think is perfectly acceptable.
Stop. I don't think you made a compare. Hold on. I have to do this because I can't let you get the rhetorical wins. I'm sorry because you.
Why are you accusing me of rhetorical wins?
Because you are. Because you're doing. No. You might not realize you're doing it, but I'm listening for it now and I'm hearing it more. Okay. Earlier, you used the comparison of Bernie Sanders. When Bernie says something like "We need free healthcare, we need free blah blah blah," Bernie Sanders is not presenting himself as a fellow poor. In fact, I'm almost positive that I've heard Bernie Sanders say, I think word for word, the average American should have the same healthcare that I have in the Senate. I'm pretty sure he said that word for word. I think I've heard Bernie say that. So
That
you're
would be like the
comparing.
equivalent
So
of
stop.
showing your
Yes.
income
So
on
this is why I'm calling this a rhetorical win because it's a disingenuous comparison. When Bernie Sanders says we need to do this, that's different. I don't think Bernie Sanders would come out and say we need to go on strike and stop paying our mortgage. I'm writing a letter to my landlord saying I'm not going to pay the mortgage. I don't think Bernie Sanders would fucking say that. That's what I'm. That's what I'm talking about. You can try to divert, okay? But Abigail's tweet here.
Come on,
Abigail's
man, really?
tweet here. Abigail's tweet here is not comparable to Bernie Sanders' statement. Abigail's tweet here is a trick into thinking that she is on your side. I was like, wait, hold on,
There
what?
you go, mission accomplished.
No, I hate you.
Right? I mean,
No, that's not mission accomplished. That's pedaled backwards. All right.
you're changing minds.
No, but I don't. But okay, I don't agree. But all right.
On what part? I'm going to push back on this. This is the whole point. If you're not happy with people changing their mind, what's the point?
Because it's not enough to change your mind when you have to do it over and over and over again, and all of the information was available to you at the start. Instead of actually changing your mind, what it seems like is you got to reap all the benefits of the misinformation originally, and then now that you are like not in a position to be hurt by acknowledging what you said as being true, now you'll do it. That's my problem. So it's kind of like, so one of the problems that I hate to point out Vaush in particular, but he does this quite a bit, but other people do too, is when people are like, oh, like I got this wrong. And then like people are like, oh, well, we should celebrate when people acknowledge you're wrong. And I agree with that. But if you have a pattern of getting something wrong over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, well, hold on, you're not going to get credit for this because you're reaping all the rewards of being incorrect initially. You're spreading all the information and doing all the harm initially, and then you do some retraction later that what makes you look good, that makes it look like you're being responsible, even though you know the retraction is not going to get the same coverage as the former, and even though you're going to repeat the same mistake in the future. Like,
Yeah, Chad is saying things like just be smarter. I feel like you have to accept that, especially if you consider yourself reasonably intelligent, whatever, you're going to be coming across that other 50% of the population quite a bit.
yeah, but I wouldn't
people are
expect
wrong
content
about
creators
stuff
with
all the time.
millions of followers to be that other 50%. Like, we should hold ourselves to a higher standard. This is our job. All we do all day is sit on the fucking computer and read shit. Like, if you're not going to be informed, no one else is. Like, what the fuck?
Sure, they ought to, but I think it's also I think they also ought to change their mind once they figure out that they're wrong. And I think not being happy when they do that kind of takes away from encouraging them to continue to do that in the future. I'd rather them do that and double down.
I agree, but like if the behavior is repeated over and over and over and over and over again, at some point we have to stop and ask ourselves, well, hold on, like, is this actually like a genuine apology or an admission of an error, or are they going to make steps to be better in the future, or are they just saying it? Like, I think that's important.
Yeah, and to be fair to you, yeah, I agree with that. If there's a pattern of that behavior, I think it warrants greater criticism. Now, does Vaush fit into that? Has Vaush been doing that a lot? Is
Yes.
this like a normal thing?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've gotten him on a call and he changes his position. When's the last time that happened?
Well, most recently it was over the GME stock stuff, but I mean, like, there have been examples in the past that I can't remember offhand right now. I'm sure Chad probably remembers, but like
Well, you're doing a whole manifesto about people who are victims, or I won't use victims because you're going to get pissed, but people that were misinformed about that and spread misinformation. So, I mean, like, it doesn't seem like that's a wholly uncommon thing. It seems like a bunch of people are in that boat.
Yeah, but my problem is you can't cry about being on the boat when you're the one steering the ship. Like,
Fair enough. I get that. There
Yeah.
should be some responsibility or some expectation there on the creators to be better than that.
to be fair, I have different levels of expectations for different people. So, like, for instance, in this manifesto, I've got like I think like Tabor is listed, and XQC is listed, and Tyler, I think Tyler One's girlfriend is listed. And like, I would hope that these people wouldn't say certain things, but I view them more as like victims than like propagators of horrible misinformation or whatever, right? But if your brand is discussing the news, your brand is going over, like social events or current events or whatever, then I mean, I would have like an expectation that you should like be able to cover these events like responsibly.
Yeah, but didn't even Deepak kind of lean into the narrative that was happening around that stuff? And he's an intelligent dude that seems to check all of his stuff. And even in his talk with you, like he seemed to understand the nuts and bolts of things, but still like
I
supported that
disagree.
narrative.
I disagree. I think that even in the conversation with me, I think there were a lot of nuts and bolts that were missing. And I think I'm pretty sure that like I don't want to like go hard on like every fucking person I talk to because people meme or whatever. But like I'm pretty sure that Pacman's reporting on it was pretty irresponsible as well, 100%.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, sorry, did I fucking cut out? My bad.
Oh, you didn't respond at all. We thought we were just like mourning a burned bridge. Sorry.
Oh shit. Yeah, I said I'll drop the Deepak thing because I don't want you guys burning bridges.
Thanks.
I also asked in your manifesto, do you make clear distinctions between the people you feel are victims and the people that you feel?
Yeah, I'll be labeling them as size of the platform and then expectation of their coverage. So like, would I expect like this person to know a whole bunch of shit about this thing? No, not really. But it's still unfortunate that they spread it. But would I expect this person to know? Absolutely. And it's horrible that they spread this. Yeah. So like, for instance, like one channel that I would hold as being very responsible for the propagation of misinformation. There's a channel called Second Thought, and it's literally a guy that does like video essay stuff. And his coverage was just unbelievably horrible. It was dog shit. Like the coverage was bad enough that like I will never watch anything off of that channel and not fact check it because it's just I could never trust anything that person would say. So yeah, that kind of it definitely depends on who the person is, the type of content they make, and then that would like influence my expectation of them.
Could I run a philosophical thing by you and have you kind of help me test it a little bit?
Knock yourself out.
So I know that you like to look at the rules and principles that people put forward and then measure that against their actions to like make determinations about their character. The way that I like to view people is that like it's like we have a flashlight in a dark room, okay, and they can point that at certain things, and they can focus their eyes to see certain things at once. And I think sometimes, although people are aware that there are points that should like contradict what they're doing, if that's not in the forefront of their mind, if that flashlight isn't pointed at that and it's not in focus at the moment that they're making a decision, they could be blind to something that they are technically aware of or they technically know about. And I feel like this could be one of those situations where some people, driven by ideology or driven by a very convincing narrative and a large community who's rallying behind that narrative, could be blind to facts and other bits of information that could have persuaded them out of those positions because they're more compelled by like what they have in front of them at the time, which is all of this hype. And I think that that does better to explain the behavior of people without making them out to be monsters. And I feel like it takes into account human error. But
yeah, I agree with you. To be clear, I don't think that most of the people that are involved in this misinformation are deliberately setting out to misinform. To some extent, I think maybe a lot of them are just victims of ideology. But
so you
what
do
I'm
think they're victims?
Yeah, but like at some point we have to take responsibility for like the things we talk about and the things that we believe and the things that we say. Like because if you're not careful at that point, then basically everybody is a victim. Like
yeah, there's a balancing act there.
Yeah, you need to be aware of like I think you need to take responsibility for the things that you say and do, and you need to be aware that like, oh, like I'm fucking up here and I can do better. That's like the goal should be to do better, not to constantly make excuses for your irresponsibility or your inability to understand something.
And I guess what I'm kind of getting at with this is maybe it gives us a different solution to these problems. Like if a bunch of people were the victims of like these narratives that were compelling, maybe it changes the advice to consider that it was just a more compelling thing that they had in front of them.
But
maybe
that's like incredibly condescending for me to have that conversation with somebody, right? Like, hey, listen, I know you thought this thing, but you, honest to God, you were just blinded by your own ideology, and that's why you were being an idiot. Like,
well, that's kind of the tone that you had to take with Deepak because of the nature of the clip, and then you came on there, and I don't know, that was the vibe that I got from that talk.
I don't know if I was quite that harsh.
In your clip, you said that he probably believes in all these ideological.
Oh, in the
things,
clip, I might have. Yeah, but in my conversation with him, I don't think I was.
Sure, but in that conversation, I don't necessarily feel like you backed off of that a ton, and you just kind of tried to explain that things are this way, and maybe I should go back at that and then get back to you on it. But it did feel that way to me.
Okay, maybe I might have.
Okay. do you see any other problems with that kind of perspective approach? Like, are there blind spots that might encounter that I'm not seeing, or like things to watch out for?
I don't know, man. I guess like, I don't know.
Okay.
It feels like really sad to me that like, hold on, I'm trying to think of a way where I'm not like rhetorically loading the dice against you. I feel like the expectation for being a decent person is very, 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 very low, like too low, that I'm not comfortable with it. And it just, I guess it's been like a little bit shocking to me that having like certain expectations that we can place upon ourselves are like just wholly unreasonable, and that we have to all be perpetually like treated as victims, and that like, well, you know, we make mistakes over and over and over and over and over and over again, and there's like no expectation to ever grow or learn or change these things. Like that bothers me a lot. That's the feeling I get, I guess.
Okay, so the feeling there is kind of that this is just giving people an out for like making mistakes and having bad ideas and engaging in
And never
thought
doing anything to
that-
improve on them.
Like, I guess so. I guess I can work at like filling in that gap, but like off the top of my head, I would say that what this is pointing out is like how we should go about fixing it. Like the reason that I picked this is because like working in behavioral psych a lot, I feel really bad for people. I feel like the world is set up to like get people to act certain ways. And I think that like Vaush's argument about like focusing on institutions over individuals to an extent is helpful because of that.
I understand, but like, and I agree with you with what you just said. But the problem is that we're not all equal. Some of us have the capability to do extraordinary things. And if we don't have those expectations on those people that are more capable, well, then who are we ever going to wait for things to happen with, right? Like in Vaush's world, there is no AOC or Bernie Sanders, because why would we ever have the expectation for somebody to act that way? They should just be like bread and butter politicians. Why stick their neck out and risk so much, right? Or there would be no Abraham Lincoln or no Martin Luther King. Like, why would you step up and speak out so much about these things, right? Like, you should just do what's expected of you. That's the only thing that's like morally righteous. But I'm willing to bet that if you were to bring somebody like AOC in and ask her, like, why do you make so much fucking noise? Why can't you just like shut up and be a normal fucking politician? I'm sure that AOC probably, my guess is after answering for a while, she would probably get to some statement where she'd be like, listen, I grew up in a really poor neighborhood. You know, I grew up, you know, I was a fucking bartender. You know, I've got a family. I was from New York. And like, I think that I have the ability now to do something really wonderful in the United States because of the position I'm in. And it would be a shame for me to get elected to Congress and do nothing and to squander that opportunity. That in and of itself would actually be bad. Like her showing up and being a normal politician, I'm willing to bet, I don't know this, but I'm willing to bet that in her eyes, it would make her a bad person. Not a morally neutral person, but an actually a bad person, you know?
Yeah, the accountability aspect of it is lacking. It feels like if you're not able to hold people accountable to what they're capable of, then you're going to just have a lot of
Yeah,
like, wasted
wait, hold on. Something's
potential.
beeping my permit. 1 second. Oh. Fuck. Give me a second, okay? Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. Hi guys. I hope I'm not coming off too dumb. Just kind of shooting the shit. This accountability thing is a good thing to think about though. I think I'll mull over that the next few days. How do we hold someone accountable with this and not just use this as an out to like explain negative human behavior? Because I've more so used it to be charitable with people, but I haven't used it how Steven likes to do things, like holding people to account. And I don't know if he worded it this way in his argument with Vaush, but I like that he's talking about like capability and stuff, and that you're kind of losing out on like how good people could be doing by not holding them to account for what they ought to be doing.
All right, I'm here. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I don't know. That's how I feel.
Was this a point that you brought up during the conversation with Vaush about?
I mean, I feel like it's about AOC or.
Just in general, that maybe his system similarly has this issue where you're kind of missing out on the potential of people by not being tougher on them about what they ought to be doing.
I mean, I feel like this is like one step away from like everything I'm talking about. I feel like this should just be patently obvious.
I mean, it's obvious to you, but you live in your brain, right?
Well, like, no, like I think it's like when I say like I think we should all strive or aspire to live to our principles. Like the obvious take there is that, you know, if we think that something is good, then we ought to do it, right? Like that good
like
people
with
will.
my perspective thing, it could be in the frame of view, but they could just not be focused on it. Like me here, like, oh, accountability. That is something that the system is kind of lacking here, and I need to think about that. Should I have been able to think about that? Should that have been obvious? Even
Or wait, what do you mean by
conversation?
accountability?
Like how this kind of argument where it's like we're not like using the full potential of people if we're not holding them to account for what they're capable of doing per their own ideology or per their own beliefs.
Oh, maybe. I understand what you mean when you say accountability here, sure.
Okay. Did you get that across at all with the Vaush thing, or was that always like one step removed?
That might have been just one step removed, I guess. But I just feel like it. Hold on. See, this is a good faith conversation which you do not attempt to have with Vaush. Capt A. Jones, your band don't ever come back to my community, you fucking brainlet. If you ever want to come back to my community, I need you to go to the hospital, I need you to get an MRI, and I need you to I need a written notice from a doctor, from a neuroscientist saying you have more than 10 brain cells if you ever want back into my chat, you fucking moron. And judging by what you've typed in my chat, you're going to have to start growing them, so good luck. All right, sorry, what were we saying?
I guess we should advocate for stem cell therapy so that we could help poor people like that in your chat.
Well, maybe, sure. Yeah, okay.
Grow them a new brain.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't feel like this take is controversial at all. And I think that like, sometimes I don't know if like, it's not to victimize myself now. I don't know if I hate to bring up class arguments, but like, I really do feel like my upbringing and the life that I've lived, I feel like it heavily influences me towards certain arguments. And now sometimes I don't know if that's actually bad or not. Maybe it's actually like I'm giving like a trauma response or something in terms of having anything. But like, if I think of what I was capable of doing when I was like a carpet cleaner, and I think of what I was capable of doing now, if I was contributing the same amount of goodness to the world in both cases, I would consider myself now to be a horrible subhuman trash piece of shit. Like, if I was only capable of doing as much now with all the money I have, with all the influence I have, with all of that, is what I could do as a carpet cleaner earning $2,000 a month, like, I would be like, what the fuck? What value do I have as a human being? Like, how worthless am I? Like, that would be my feeling, I guess. It would be the standard I would hold myself to. And I don't even feel like that's that ridiculous. Like, I don't know, man. Like people have so much money to do stuff, and so much more than like anybody else when you're in this like content creation stuff. You have so much available to you, and to just sit on it and do nothing, and then to sit there and scream and cry about how workers are mistreated and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't know, it feels like really, really, really bad to me. That feels like a horrible thing to me.
Yeah, I'd like to think that, like Vaush said, maybe some of these people just didn't think about it. Like, what is apparent and obvious to you, thanks in part to your upbringing, thanks in part to like your continued dedication over time, like to evaluating the good that you're doing. It's obvious to you, but I mean, it might not be obvious to other people. Other people might not think in these like paradigms, and they might not be measuring themselves with a yardstick similar to yours. So I think what may be like very obvious to you may not be so much for other people. I think that might be worth like keeping in mind more.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Because I mean, like you admit sometimes that like, hey, I don't think you guys should follow like my entire ideology because I think like strangely, and maybe I'm like this, that, or the other thing, and maybe it's not a healthy way to live, and maybe
yeah, I'll say that for sure when it comes to like interpersonal relationships and whatnot, for sure. But when I speak on matters of like integrity, or I think what makes a person a good person, I think that the world is truly sad that some of the things they talk about aren't just considered like very basically like almost self-evident. Like if you have principles that you preach strongly that you ought to live by those principles, that seems self-evident to me.
Yeah. But what I was trying to get at with that point more so was that like you recognize that your perspective is unique and that your perspective is something that other people might not even be able to see from.
I don't
So I
know if
feel
that's true. Well, my perspective, my whole perspective, my perspective on this particular issue, I don't think is that controversial or crazy. Like,
no, but it may feel alien to people like more than you would think it ought to be, right? Like you may think it should be something that's easy to adopt and easy to see, but it's worth keeping in mind that that's just from your perspective, and depending on other people's upbringing and what they got in like the forefront of their mind, they may like
I guess it
not
like
come.
then maybe we come back to the grifting argument. It bothers me when I see some content creators will give these like impassioned speeches, and I feel like if you really truly believe this strongly about something, you shouldn't need some like some gnome dipshit like me to point out that you should do something more about it. Like this should be like self-evident to you. Like if somebody were to ask me, right, like does Hassan or does Central Committee, or does PhilosophyTube, do these people actually care? Would one of these people, let's say that this group of people were walking down the street and you saw that like on the other end of the street, someone was struggling to like carry her groceries into her apartment, or some guy like couldn't afford a cab. Would they like cross the street and go help that person? I really don't know the answer to that. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I don't think they would, but I wouldn't know the answer to that. I just wouldn't. Do you know who Maya, the streamer, is?
Yeah.
If Maya was walking somewhere and she saw like on the other end of the street that there was like a scared like injured cat or some shit like that, I think that she would cross the street and help the animal in an instant. Because when I look at the way that like she lives her life, it seems like, okay, these aren't just like slogans for her. This seems to be something that she like feels really passionately about, and she puts like a lot of her life and energy into doing these things. Like this seems to be like a pretty principled person. I don't know if I feel that way about a lot of other like content creators or influencers or whatever that do politics online.
And you can predict that of Maya because Maya makes a habit out of doing that. That's like how she lives her life.
Yeah.
But for other people who haven't lived their lives following those principles all the time, and who maybe came into these ideologies through content creation, that's kind of their day in, day out. It's difficult for them to think outside of that paradigm. And that's why I'm saying like what is normal and what is habitual for them may not be in line with these like principled decisions that you think they ought to be making. And it might not be obvious from their perspective those steps that they should be taking.
Okay. And I understand that we've looped on this a lot. I guess just my feeling is that like for any normal human, like these things would just happen naturally. Like what you're telling me.
Apparently not.
Yeah, I'm trying to like, so like the analogy to what you're telling me is like, let's say that somebody is very thirsty and there's a glass of water sitting across the table from them and they're not drinking the water. Like I would be very confused, and I would think like, well, if you're thirsty, you would just drink. It seems like it would naturally extend from your thirst. You would drink. And then what you're telling me is like, well, for some people, maybe they need a little bit more guidance to actually like take a drink, right? So my thought isn't like maybe they need guidance to take some to learn how to drink water. Maybe they're not actually thirsty. That would be like my immediate thought. So your immediate thought is that like, well, maybe people need help being shown like what they need to do here to do the right thing. But I guess my more immediate thought is like, I think they would already be doing it if they really cared. It seems like they just don't care that much. That's the difference. Maybe I'm more cynical in that view, and you're a little bit more optimistic, or maybe I'm incorrect actually, and it's not about being cynical; it's about being wrong. Maybe I don't know.
I mean, I'm open to just being like overly positive or overly charitable. I mean, that's like a problem that I have. So it could go either way there. I enjoy these talks. They really get me thinking about things.
Sure thing. That's good.
Alrighty. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about from that conversation or just in general?
Not that I can think of, no.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to the next one, dude. Have a good rest of your stream, guys.
All right, thanks a lot. Good luck, buddy.
Yeah, you too.
Bye. I love you, bye. Destiny server nailing me to the wall right now. Full context of the tweet. The fact that he said he's okay with lying sometimes if it achieves his political goals or outcomes is an incredibly dangerous road. I think the worst thing about Trump was the fact that he lied so much and literally conned the American people. His lies made them do things they would have never even thought of doing prior, i.e. storming the Capitol. Vaush's lies don't seem as bad because his politics have virtually no power. However, if they did, this is where some dangerous stuff can happen. History is riddled with examples where lying and dishonesty were always almost always lead to horrid ends. He needs to reconsider this. Oh. Unlike people realize the dangers of extinction, it's really comparable to the dangers of Trump. Nice. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.